And this week on the show, back for a third trip around, we've got Mike Callicrate. Where are you at today, Mike?
Colorado Springs at our meat plant.
I never know where you're going to be when we talk.
It's usually either St. Francis, Kansas at the ranch, or I'm here in Colorado Springs.
Good deal. Good deal. How things been going?
We need a rain. We had a little rain out at St. Francis, and we had a huge snow in Colorado Springs. It was beautiful over this last weekend. But in St. Francis and really old western Kansas, southwest Nebraska, we are in a terribly dry area and really hurting. One of our bigger cow herds in the area called the other day and had to make some decisions. You know, they had 500 cows and no grass. It just wasn't green enough. It was not gonna be able to handle any cows. And then of course you throw in there those high feed costs. You know, I'm happy the farmer's getting a better price for grain, but boy, we're in a real squeeze if we can't raise the feed in our area and be able to afford to feed these cattle.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to have to unpack that can a little bit later, but the high feed cost, lack of rain, I feel it too. Until this morning, we were over 230 days since we've had an inch of rain, and we've had probably 1.75 inches since last night. And it's all come real nice and slow. It's just this nice, slow, beautiful rain. Seems like a lot, and it is, but it's not anywhere close to what we need to make it right.
You're when you get that dry, a lot of that rain never goes into the soil. It just gets sucked up by all the biomass and dry air, and it's just, yeah, we need a lot more rain.
Yeah, for sure. So what have you been up to lately?
But Brian, while we're on that subject of weather, it is nice to know that that's the only risk that we have to face as cattle producers.
Yeah, to some extent. That's
the only
risk. The biggest ones.
That's the only risk, right? So, you know, the guys that are out there doing all the work and taking the most risk now get a drought. So, you know, it's not easy. It's not easy to keep the things running.
Yeah, for sure. So what else have you been up to last 6 or so months since the last time we talked?
You know, what I've been working on Ranch Foods Direct is about sort of an alternative pathway to the marketplace for Callicrate Cattle Company. You know, in '98, when I got blackballed by the Packers, I'd already been real heavily involved in litigation and legislation and trying to just make cattle markets more fair and raise income at the farm and ranch gate every way we could. But the third sort of solution for me was to build that pathway to the consumer, you know, around the broken system that we talk about, that concentrated and consolidated marketplace, the big packers standing in the way of us getting to the consumer, and then their partners, the big retailers and the big food service companies. They're going through them just wasn't going to leave me as a producer enough dollars to stay alive. So I built a Ranch Foods Direct model, but what we're doing is really taking that to the next level here in Colorado Springs. We just signed a contract on a land purchase to put together, really, it's kind of a local regional food village, and it'll have the butcher shop, which will be us, carcasses hanging fully on display in front of customers, a fresh meat counter. It'll take you back to 1969. When I graduated from high school, I worked in a meat shop in Evergreen, Colorado, and all of our meat came in carcasses from the Denver meat packers. We had Pepper, Litvack, we had Pueblo, Alpha Beta, Sterling Pack in Sterling, Colorado. But all the trade was in carcasses, not boxed beef. So what we want to do is build a model that shows that time when it worked for producers, when it worked for the meat market guys, and when it worked just as well for the consumer. And so what we want to do is not only just have that meat market, because we have that now. We have 2 locations in Colorado Springs where we have that now. We cut from the carcass. But I want to put it in a format of a sort of a village, to where the baker, the brewer, maybe the distiller, the coffee roaster, the cheese maker, of course, the butcher, maybe the best steak that you can get in the region, the taco trailer, all of us that care about a local economy being healthy, and all of us who care about eating good food and supporting people who grow food, and the independent businesses that deliver that to us have a safe place to do business. And so I'm suggesting that we go out and we buy land, and that we build each one of those vendors that I mentioned earlier their own space that they can own. Right now, if you are a young guy and you want to bake bread and open up a bakery, typically you go to some developer, or you go to some commercial real estate person, and you say, where can I rent a place to open a bakery? And so you'll go in, and of course you don't have any money. You're running on a shoestring. You're just hoping you can make it, and people will support you.
Right.
But what happens is you jump in there into a 5 or a 10-year lease with a landlord, and you're subject to rent increases, and you're subject to CAM increases and common area maintenance increases. You're subject to a lot of things that you have no more control over. And what if there was a model that you could build your business inside a space that you could actually own and earn equity in, and pay a mortgage instead of rent? If USDA, if President Biden with his Build Back Better is really interested in giving independent business and farmers and ranchers access to consumers through a local regional food system, I'm saying let's begin with the end in mind. Let's build it. Let's build that community of businesses that are food related, and let them own their space. And then when they're ready to retire, talk about planning and investing for the long term. When you, as a bakery owner, and you're now 75 years old and getting tired, maybe you're 65 years old and getting tired, but you want to turn it over to the next generation. Maybe it's your best employees, maybe it's your children, but you can do that now because you owned it. You paid a mortgage instead of rent, and now you have equity in the real estate that your business is located in. And so now you can say, hey, look, you guys want to buy the business, I'm happy to sell it to you. You can make monthly payments, and you now assume a mortgage, and that person then can go ahead and retire. But also advise that, the new owners of that business, maybe hang out and work every now and then in your retirement. It just becomes this community that sticks together and helps each other. So it creates opportunity immediately for farmers and ranchers to get access to the consumer via this community of food producers. But it also helps that next generation, be able to really stay on the ranch, and stay in the bakery, and stay in the meat shop, or stay in whatever business that may be. And so, we're really looking at this being the alternative model to the chain, to the franchise, to those Wall Street based businesses that sell things from somewhere else in all the communities around the world, and then take the money away every day. And so I think we overlook the people between the ranch and the farm and the consumer. Those people who are working hard. They haven't had a raise since 1970 in real dollars. And the model that we've got right now that COVID exposed is as fragile and totally breakable. with big meat plants and fast moving chains and inexperienced workers standing shoulder to shoulder. That just doesn't work. And it won't work going forward. And why we'd want to build more of those kind of facilities beyond me. Let's invest our money in that local regional food system as I've described, and really build something that's resilient and sustainable.
Okay. Yeah, there was a lot there. You know, I've heard rumors at the Packers that the Big Four are trying to build some new plants, but again, we still haven't seen any news release. Nobody's talking about it, and nobody's, been posting on social media saying, "Oh, hey, there's a new Cargill plant going in down the street from me." I don't it doesn't seem like they're trying to add capacity to alleviate, to work with any shortages. And I start to get really concerned about, you know, we talk about small scale meat plants and, mid scale and community sized meat plants, but on it, I'm starting to wonder how many of those do we have to make a difference, or will they all make a difference?
No, they won't make a difference at all, Brian. The first thing we have to do is break up the abusive market power, the concentrated power of the current meat packing and retail food service businesses that are out there that now control the market. Building new infrastructure that sells through the existing infrastructure at any level, whether it's food service or retail, absolutely will not work. These folks are used to making 30% return on their equity. Cisco last at the end of the year was, for the 5-6 year average, was over 43% return on equity. They are not going to willingly give that up. And of course, their whole business has been, making money for their shareholders and executives and all of that. And they feel that's their responsibility. And honestly, it is. And that's part of the problem. It is their responsibility to lie, cheat, and steal, to make all the damn money they can possibly make. And you don't just tell them to be nice and hopefully let you have a seat at the table. You've got to kick their ass. You've got to break them up. There should not be a conglomerate anywhere on the planet that controls any part of any vital industry in the United States. Conglomerates we shouldn't allow conglomerates to even exist. Look what General Electric did. They finally figured it out. They got big enough that they knew themselves that they had become inefficient and that they were not doing a great job in all these various industries that they had decided to put money in and run. So they broke themselves up. Johnson & Johnson is breaking themselves up. I mean, didn't antitrust wait a little too long when the companies themselves say, hey, you guys should have thrown the flag on us, 30 years ago. Where have you been? You could have saved us some money. We just thought, we actually believed our own lie that bigger is better, and we were wrong.
There's another monopolized commodity that's having shortages, and by the time this one comes out in about a week, I bet we'll still be hearing about it. Baby food shortages.
Yeah.
3 companies make like 98% of the baby food sold in the United States. 3 companies, 98%.
Yeah.
Nobody sees a problem with that.
And Abbott, the conglomerate, Abbott controls 5%. It's 5% of their business, and they control like 90-something% of the market. And the government is complicit in this whole thing. The government is part of the problem because they fueled it. They've supported concentration and consolidation and got us where we are today in this completely broken system. But my goodness, Abbott, they got the deal with the government. Basically, the government gave them a monopoly through the WIC program, Women and Infants Nutrition Program, and so here, they get 5% of their company, but it's 90-some% of the entire supply of formula in the country. And is that something that the CEO really gives does he really care about it? It's 5% of the company. oh, it might be a little bit of an irritant right now when mothers are screaming at him. But honestly, the mothers can't even find him.
And does the
And
factory
so,
manager care?
no. And so I'm just saying, we made some really big mistakes. And like I said, a conglomerate, that's the best example. A conglomerate should never control the supply of baby formula. And of course, this is really serious when you can't feed your babies, when you can't feed the infants and take care of them. It's also a real problem that mothers don't have time to nurse. They got to get back to work. They can't pay the mortgage if they don't. I mean, why are we putting so much pressure on all these young mothers when, if the economy worked and there was a fair distribution of income throughout moms could stay home with their kids, because the other breadwinner, or the main breadwinner of the family, could earn enough at his job to pay the mortgage. But no, he works at Tyson in Garden City, and they live 7 families to a trailer house.
And
And now we can't even get milk.
She works at Dollar General.
Exactly. They don't have enough money to even live. And so had the meat shelves been empty longer, it would have probably helped people become more aware of the threat and the insecurity of having big corporations in charge of your food supply. When the Tyson fire happened in Garden City, there was some big price movements, and they call it the black swan. And then we have another black swan with COVID, and another black swan with somebody tapping into JBS's computer system. All these black swans, and pretty quick, it just becomes the standard ordinary deal. It's always a wreck. They're always trying to figure out how to pay less for cattle and charge consumers more for meat. And I'm just saying, if we don't get rid of this conglomerate ownership of these critical industries, we can't get anywhere. And so the Justice Department has got to get with USDA and has got to get with the Federal Trade Commission, and they got to put a plan together to break these plants up. And I'm suggesting that there should not be any multi-plant ownership at all. These big guys like Tyson, each plant that they own is about 5 or 6% of the total slaughter in the US. Each plant. And I'm saying, let them own one plant, period. If there is an efficiency, economy of scale benefit, it'll be realized at that level. But I would argue that it's not efficient. Most certainly got an economy of scale argument, but it's just basic raw market power that keeps competitors out. And as long as we allow these guys to slaughter this many animals in across our country, and multi-species in addition, there's no reason for these plants to be killing or controlling all 3 meat categories, and including even the 4th, the fake meat. So you take a Cargill, they're in all the categories. They're in poultry, pork, beef, and fake meat. JBS, same way. Tyson, Cargill, JBS, all of them are the same way. And I'm just saying, if we want a resilient food system, one that works, one that keeps people on the land with a fair share of the consumer dollar, these guys got to go. And their buddies at retail, Kroger, Walmart, Amazon, which owns Whole Foods, those guys got to go too. You've got to create the pathway to the consumer. And that's where I go back to the village sort of concept that I just mentioned. I think consumers are clamoring for it. There's a little town north of Colorado Springs by the name of Monument that a Starbucks coffee shop came into town and put a shop in. Well, there's a longtime coffee shop named Serrano's that's been there for a long time. And it was really cool the way the community, when Starbucks came in, they just didn't go there. Now that's hard. I mean, it's like, that's really amazing that this community said no to Starbucks and continued to support their local coffee shop. And so you go up there and Serrano's will be just packed full, and there'll be 2 people in Starbucks. And of course, Starbucks has probably got a location across the interstate, and it's not far to get to another Starbucks. But I'm just saying, we've had enough of these darn big corporate controlled chains and franchises that extract wealth. not only from our communities and main streets, but from our farms and ranches and the workers who make sure that food gets to our plates.
So I know we talk about this often about using the Packers and Stockyards Act to break up the Packers, and that's an antitrust. I guess that's a weapon of antitrust in the government's tool bag, right?
Yeah, it's specifically designed to protect the producer, and it was really just never enforced after, much after the breakup of the Packers 120 or so years ago. It was actually 100 years ago that we broke up the Packers, 1921 Packers and Stockyards Act, and they had a consent decree that basically it broke up the conglomerate control. So they had to give up retail, railroad, stockyards. I mean, if you were going to be a packer, you had to be a packer. You couldn't be feeding the cattle. And so that really worked, but then it really never got enforced. And we came into that era when, Ronald Reagan was president, and even before that somewhat. And we just decided that corporations were nice and we should let them get as big as they want to get, because we really believe big is better, and it's time to globalize and have big companies that can sell and buy on a global basis. And we just wiped out the Packers and Stockyards Act with lack of enforcement. But there was a really big hit to the Packers and Stockyards Act with the Tyson IBP case that I was a plaintiff in. I blame Judge Lyle E. Strong. He was one of those Reagan appointees that didn't believe in antitrust law enforcement, didn't believe in, holding corporations accountable. And we won that lawsuit against Tyson IBP when the jury awarded its $1.28 billion. And it was in 2004 that trial occurred. And the jury apologized to us. We're sorry. You deserve a lot more, but we didn't have a mathematical formula available to us that would allow it. But honestly, we didn't care about the money. We wanted the injunctive relief. We wanted the Packers to compete again instead of cooperate and continue their anti-competitive practices. And so Lyle Strom, we knew he was in Tyson's pocket when he wrote the jury instructions. Because the jury instructions were really written as if the Clayton or Sherman Act was being applied to this case.
What's that?
The Sherman and Clayton Acts are antitrust laws that happened before the Packers and Stockyards Act that really addressed that robber baron monopoly economy that we had around 1900. Upton Sinclair wrote the book The Jungle in 1906, and that really shone the light on the big meat packers and all their bad behavior. But we, at that time, we were passing laws to control monopoly. And so that's what the Sherman and the Clayton Act were about. And it prevented collusion, but it was all about not the consumer benefit. How do we protect the consumer? And so here the meat monopoly comes along, and it becomes a question then when Congress was considering what to do. It was about how do we protect the producer? And so it's specifically to protect the producer, which was great. And it helped us for some time. But with Judge Strom in the Alabama case against Tyson IBP, he wrote jury instructions that were very much in line with the ones you would see for the Sherman and Clayton Act. And he believed that, that's where this harm to competition problem came from. So if you're A.T. Terry on the East Coast, contract growing for Tyson, and you find out that Tyson is cheating you on the chicken weights, you've got to prove that because Tyson cheated you on your chicken weights, you've got to prove that harmed chicken growers all across the United States. Well, no, it didn't. It harmed A.T. Terry. A.T. Terry proved that Tyson cheated him on his chicken weights, but he couldn't get relief under the Packers and Stockyards Act because the judges had decided that he had to prove harm to competition. Well, that might be true for the Sherman and Clayton acts, but it is absolutely not true for the Packers and Stockyards Act. In fact, the Packers and Stockyards plain language says that no meat packer can do anything that even so much has the effect of reducing competition. And so how do we end up with 80 and 85% captive supplies, with the meat packers staying out of the market for 6 weeks in the spring of 1994, not buying any cattle, dropping the market $17 a hundredweight? How does that happen if you've got a Packers and Stockyards Act that says anything they do that even has the effect of reducing competition, they can't do? And the other thing that Judge Strom said is, or what Judge Strom believed, was that if these packers have a business reason, rule of reason, in other words, if they have a business reason and if they have to do something to meet the competition, like feed cattle, or better yet, the formula that IBP developed where they had captive supply without having to own the cattle, if they had to do that to compete with Cargill and ConAgra, now ConAgra's JBS, then that was okay. That wasn't all bad, and we're not going to tie their hands while their competitors run over them. And so rather than do the right thing and just say, look, no packer can have captive supplies, no packer can have ownership of the livestock to the extent that it impacts competition in the market. And no, we didn't do that. We gave them a green light. And so in that lawsuit against Tyson and IBP that was decided in 2004, the judge gave the green light to the big packers to, pillage and plunder all they want. I mean, without any worry about law enforcement. And you remember back when Tyson was buying IBP, right after John Tyson, it was in 2002, he was at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association meeting there to give a talk and basically announced that he was buying IBP and that the cattlemen shouldn't worry because it was going to be just fine. We weren't going to do to cattle producers what we did to chicken growers. And I talked to him when he was at that, before he went to the microphone that day. And I said, John, I've got a lawsuit against you. If you buy IBP, you're going to be buying a lawsuit. And he said, well, what lawsuit's that? And I said, well, it's the Packers. It's anti-competitive practices. IBP's been using captive supplies to depress the cash market. It's anti-competitive and it's illegal under the law. And Tyson says, well, I know all about the Packers and Stockyards Act. And I said, yeah, I'm sure you do. I said, had it been properly applied, you wouldn't be where you are in the chicken business. You certainly wouldn't be where you are today buying the biggest meat packer, IBP. And so we fussed back and forth a little bit. And then he said, well, Mike, you're suing the wrong people. You should be suing Walmart. They dictate price to us and we have no choice but to pay you less. And I said, exactly, I totally agree. And had you not had such a large amount of market power, you couldn't pay us less. Had IBP not had their captive supplies, had Tyson in the poultry business not been able to lower their cost of production by not paying growers a fair price and workers a fair wage, they wouldn't be able to produce less and less for the Walmart contract every year. and so John Tyson was right. But the problem is judges like Lyle Strom and other dereg judges, mostly of the Reagan era that were appointed on the federal bench, those guys really gave corporations new power to do even worse things than we've seen even from the 1900 timeframe. Today, our markets are more concentrated by almost double what they were then. Food safety is worse now than it was then, except on a much larger scale with more efficient distribution to the consumer. And you think about the recalls that we have and the size of those recalls and how widespread they are. So that same efficient distribution system works great for pathogens as well. We're treating workers as bad as we did back in the jungle era, except we're treating a lot more of them worse, and we're treating them worse also in other countries, even Canada, Mexico. In order to compete with JBS and these big meat packers that run chains so fast, Everybody else has to do the same thing. And so I'm just saying, I think it's time to put a stop to it. And let's honestly, truly rebuild local regional food systems that actually work. Like 1969, when I was in that meat market in Evergreen, Colorado, it was inside the thrifty grocery store.
What's your timeline for your food village? When do you hoping to have that running?
Well, we signed a contract to purchase the real estate. Now we're doing our due diligence, but it looks like we should have all of that pretty well figured out by November 1st.
Okay.
And then it's a matter of, getting construction documents approved and all of that. So I think we're looking at 2024 to get that done. But Brian, this is where the farmers market's going to be held. This is where the music is going to be played. This is where we can de-stress instead of stress. This is where you're going to go and talk to everybody. This is where you're going to go, and the kids are going to be able to have a safe place to play while you have a beer and a burger. And when it's time to go home, those kids are going to be saying, "Are you ready to go?" And they're going to go to sleep when they get home.
I'm tired.
This is going to be the place where really community happens, and independent business thrives, and farmers and ranchers get a fair share of the consumer dollar. And you know what? Consumers aren't going to pay a penny more than what they're paying now, because there is plenty of money. There's never been more money in the food system, in the food business at the consumer level. And never so little going back to the people who actually grow stuff and do the work.
Yep. And the more inflation hits, like the more inflation sets in and like puts its sticky little fingers on the economy, the more that's going to affect food price. I guess that the more it'll affect the price of food that has to go through a bunch of different hands and a bunch of different middlemen before it gets to you.
We slaughter our cattle right on the ranch where they're raised. So we got pigs and cattle out there that we kill right on site. And just think about that efficiency of not having to haul the animal. I ran into a trucker in St. Francis last week that was loading cattle right in our area to go to Schuyler, Nebraska with $5 diesel fuel. Are you kidding me? Why would you take them 400 or 500 miles to slaughter when the Garden City plant's 170 miles away? We've got the Brush plant or Fort Morgan plant that's 120 miles away. Greeley that's 180. I mean, what is going on here? And so you think about that inefficiency. But honestly, those cattle were very likely being hauled from Northwest Kansas to Schuyler, Nebraska, because they needed the cattle back there to break the market, or so that they didn't have to go into the market and push the cash price up. And so they're regionally, they're working with cattle supplies that they have control of to keep the prices down at all their plants. And this is just an example of one of the anti-competitive practices that they have.
Do you think that they would do you think that they would have some other contractor on a formula in one yard, maybe have a little oversupply, and then ship those at a loss to another region just to depress a price?
Of course they do. In fact, we knew that from when ConAgra was selling cattle to IBP years ago. ConAgra had a few extra cattle, which they had those 300,000 head in those 3 feedlots up in near Greeley and Yuma, Colorado. And you get a little long on some cattle, you can sell them to IBP. It helps break the market. Actually, that wasn't ConAgra. That was Cargill that sold. I'll have to look that up. It was either Cargill or ConAgra. That anyway, and Cargill had the same situation. They had a bunch of feedlots too, but they actually literally sold cattle to IBP. I mean, a big number of cattle, and we saw the market literally drop. A lot of dollars within that week that those packers were able to stay out of the market. So again, you can't match an independent cattle feeder against a multinational conglomerate and hope to have any market power. It's just not going to happen. And so you got to go back to your first question. How do we, what do we do? I mean, do we need more big plants? No, we don't. We need to scatter those investments out And we need to feed the people in a region, not the people around the world. And we need to let the world do the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I can start to see the problems with big corporate structure, say a big company that's run for the benefit of the shareholders. Okay. The people that manage that company, they have a responsibility to turn a profit for the shareholders, to show return for the shareholders. And that goes for everybody, from everybody in management, all the salaried management type people. So you take, a large company, won't name any one of them because we don't want to get sued, but you could pick a name because there's so many of them having supply chain problems. So you have a plant that has to shut down for some reason. Well, the manager of that plant, is he under any special pressure to get it running? Probably not. Well, do the best you can. He's going to do the best he can. But say if it was a manufacturer of baby food formula and it was a family that owned that worked there every day, they would wake up every day and go to work owning that plant and know that their mission in life was to provide safe, clean, nutritious baby formula to whatever babies needed, right?
Right.
But when you remove that ownership layer and you distance them so far from the means of production or the place or the mechanism of production, you lose a lot of accountability.
Yeah, that's right. And you go back to COVID. What did Ranch Foods Direct do when COVID hit? We never had an empty shelf. We just worked harder. I mean, it's such a small company. It just serves the communities that it's in, St. Francis, Kansas, and Colorado Springs. But we worked really hard. I mean, our guys just stepped up, and I mean, we just worked as fast and hard as we could, and we kept shelves full while the other guys' shelves were bare, completely bare and empty. And so we've already proved that, and it's kind of like the Keg restaurant in Manitou. It's a family-owned restaurant. We've supplied them ever since we've been in Colorado Springs, and for 20 some years, and they came out of COVID probably with the best year they have had financially. At the same time as a lot of other restaurants went bankrupt and just closed down, and chains closed up, and their workers didn't want to come to work. Heck, they didn't own the place. But the Keg right away decided to go curbside, and they sold a lot of food curbside with a lot less labor expense in their business, and so they've come out of it in good shape, and they're ready to go on. Now, what about those restaurants in Great Bend, Kansas, or Salina, Kansas, that Sysco failed to deliver? Now, what are you going to do? They don't have a Ranch Foods Direct supplying them like the Keg. The Keg never ran out of meat. We never ran out of meat. But those little restaurants in Salina and Great Bend and Larned and wherever they may be, and they've been buying off the Sysco truck, they just didn't get deliveries. And so they didn't, even if they wanted to, they couldn't have continued with curbside or contact-free delivery. They couldn't have done it. And what was really weird is when Sysco decided they weren't going to deliver the small restaurants, and in fact, we're going to rather take care of their national accounts, which are chains and franchises, then US Food decided they weren't going to call on Sysco's accounts, that they weren't going to sell Sysco's accounts. Well, the bottom line is they had looked at merging with Sysco. Sysco was going to buy US Foods or merge with US Foods earlier, and they got to know each other really well. Well, they didn't have to buy, they didn't have to merge. They had all the benefits of just knowing each other really well and having the same objective of maximizing profits. And so they decided, well, like the big packers, why don't we just cooperate rather than compete? And so if Sysco wasn't going to deliver the account, then the US Food Service wasn't going to deliver the account. And so now you got small plants, small restaurants, food service or food related businesses that can't get supply. And so you just think how vulnerable they are. And so now they not only had the problem with supply, which the keg didn't have, and our customers at Ranch Foods didn't have, but now they got their landlord trying to raise the rent, or the landlords trying to demand, that they pay, whatever. And now, like you said about the inflation thing, all of diesel fuel at $5 is creeping into everything. Everything's going to go up because diesel's at $5. But the biggest problem with inflation is not true inflation, it's price gouging. And you mentioned their loyalty and their legal responsibilities to maximize shareholder returns. And so if you're an oil company and you want to maximize shareholder returns, and you're in a position of monopoly power, or at least shared monopoly power with 3 other oil companies, then by God, you're going to jack the price of gas and oil. It's going up, and your shareholders are going to have a windfall, and people everywhere are going to be hurt. And this just gets back to why in the world did antitrust sleep so long? They are showing signs of waking up, just signs. There hasn't been any real progress yet. And I mean, really, Justice Department, where's the report on the Tyson fire? Where's the report on the price fixing during COVID? JBS paid $52.5 million in settlements for fixing the price at the same time as a reported $1 billion profit. Really, is 52 million going to make a difference?
Yeah, I
It
think they're
certainly
still
isn't going to make any
investigating
difference to
that.
the people they cheated. Did I sent you that rap sheet on JBS earlier today? I don't know if you had time to check your email, but JBS has got quite the impressive rap sheet.
Yeah.
And so honestly, part of the deal with corporate charters is you can't be a felon, you can't be a serial lawbreaker. You've got to behave well. So I'm just wondering, why are we allowing JBS to have a charter to do business? And the same for Tyson, Smithfield, Cargill, and all these others.
Well,
They're serial lawbreakers.
The last time we talked, you brought up that there is a USDA rule that prevented felons from owning packing plants in the United States. And
That's right.
I think you said that you'd called out JBS already once to the USDA, and the answer was, well, they're not felons in the US, they're just felons in Brazil, so that's okay. Did that change?
No, that didn't change. In fact, I love Greg Gunthorpe wrote him a letter too, and said, look, these guys are serious felons. I mean, they bribed the last 3 presidents of Brazil, almost 2,000 government officials and inspectors to get rotten meat in the United States. At what point do you pull their grant of inspection? I mean, if I did that, I'd never be in the back in the meat business. And so the government is favoring the big plants over the little plants. And there's so many common sense things they could do to help small plants and reduce the onerous, inspection process that they deal with, and make it actually a lot better and a lot safer and easier to hold people accountable. But USDA is not interested in that. USDA is only interested in the benefit of big corporations and the big slaughterhouses. And of course, we've got the revolving door and from big business into the agencies and back again. And Almanza, the guy that let the rotten meat in from JBS when he was food safety inspection guy, administrator for food safety inspection service, he just, when Sonny Perdue made him stop importing the rotten meat, he quit and went to work for JBS, who was shipping us the rotten meat. That's the kind of thing we got to stop. Almanza should be in prison for what he did, and yet he got a $5 million upfront payment, and he's no doubt getting a livable wage out of the Batista brothers.
Have we got to the point where these meat packers are now in that, I guess, the unofficial legal governmental protected status of too big to fail, and they're just kind of looking the other way and letting them do whatever they want to do? Because that really seems like that's what's happening. Like,
yeah,
too big to fail. And I can also define too big to fail as too many congressmen are invested in those companies to let them go, to let anything happen to them.
Yeah, and invested in a couple of different ways. But you know, the Tyson fire, although it wasn't, you know, really legitimate. I mean, they actually killed more cattle the following week than they'd done before the fire. Uh, I mean, so they were able to work Saturdays and, and speed things up, and were able to fill in. But they used it as a way to break the market and to maximize their profits. And so, yeah, just this whole price gouging thing, if we don't break up this abusive power, we're never going to see an end to what we would call inflation, which is actually price gouging.
Yeah. Yep. So over the last couple weeks, I spoke with several people. Brett Kinsey, that episode just came out well, today as we're recording it. So, and then a couple weeks ago, I had Don Schiffelbein from NCBA on. Did you get a chance to catch that episode?
I watched every minute of it, Brian. Oh, I couldn't believe Don's answer. Don's answer to us being successful is we have to innovate. Really?
Where's the innovation?
We don't need a fair share of the consumer dollar. We don't need the living wage. And I get very tired of all these guys that are out there trying to tell you how to farm and how to ranch. And, you know, you need smaller cows, you need more cows, you need, rotational grazing. If you go regenerative, you can save money. What's this idea that we've got to be the low cost producer and the last man standing? With all the technology and all of the practices and management and stuff that's going on while our kids leave and never want to come back. Why the hell don't we go after what's really wrong? And that is our share of the consumer dollar has dropped as a result of big meat packers cooperating rather than competing, rigging the markets and paying us too damn little. When are we going to go after that darn problem? And we're wasting valuable time here.
I'm with you. I mean, I'm with you. And the thing that stuck out to me is it was I think it was about in the first half hour. I said something, he said something, I said something, and then he really kind of pushed back on me about knowing your customer, that you have to know your customer. And my thought was, yes, you do. And I'm pretty sure I know who my customer is. I feel like I have a good idea of who his customer is, and I know your customer. And let's just say that you and I are kind of standing on one side of the road and he's standing on another with who our customer is. But that's important because, yes, you have to know who your customer is and what your customer wants. And you have to make a product that makes sense for you, that makes economic sense for you to make for that customer.
Yeah, well, Don Scheffelbein's customer is the big meat packer. And Don Scheffelbein serves the big meat packer's interest as president of NCBA. And I honestly feel sorry for the guy. I mean, he's obviously a nice person. He's got a nice family and he's done a good job of bringing him into the operation. And then he tells you about his advantages. You know, he can innovate. Well, we can feed byproducts. Well, that's great. You can feed byproducts while Paul Engler's feeding, $8 corn. That's great. But Paul Engler's got a sweetheart deal, probably that's better than you, Don Scheffelbein. You no doubt have a sweetheart deal. Why don't you share that with us? Why don't you tell us what you're actually getting for your cattle? How about some transparency in CBA? How about pulling the curtain back on this confidentiality provision that reversed the intent of mandatory price reporting? Scheffelbein is on the opposite side of all of the policy that I believe needs to happen. And he's probably been an NCBA member for a long time. And he's probably, drank the globalization Kool-Aid and bigger is better Kool-Aid. But doggone it, there's no excuse. There's just no excuse for what's coming out of his mouth in the way of supporting policy that hurts cattle producers. Why don't we have country of origin labeling? Why did we at the rulemaking table, like we did with mandatory price reporting and the confidentiality rule, which reversed the intent of that piece of legislation. Same thing happened with country of origin labeling. We passed it. It was the right thing to do. And then during the rulemaking, they say, well, it won't apply to, ground or value added or cooked or whatever. Well, you know what? When I go to a McDonald's, which I won't do, but if I go to a McDonald's, I want to know where the meat comes from.
Yes.
Why shouldn't I be able to know as an eater the same as I am as a shopper at a grocery store? And so anyway, Don Shovelbein is taken on the position of the big meat packers, big retail, big food in general, and they're using him. He's window dressing, and he's got a hat, and he sets it down on the table like you're supposed to. And I thought that was funny. One of the congressmen said, "Oh, he knows how to put his hat on the table." Yeah, it's crown. You put your crown, the hat with the crown down. It's like bull riders. You never threw your hat on the bed. I mean, there's some things that when you wear your cowboy hat, and so he looks good. I mean, the guy fills the role well for NCBA, but it's a complete and total betrayal of the cattle producer, the people paying the check off. It's a complete betrayal. And they sat there in NCBA and they watched that producer share of the consumer dollar go to nothing. 27% during COVID, when it used to be 70% when I first started feeding cattle in 1970, in the 70s. I mean, this guy is totally betraying the industry that he makes his money off of. And he's got a purebred business. So he's got some Angus cattle. So isn't he just a little bit outside of the real market there as well? He's selling bulls, but hey, I think the guy ought to, he ought to be selling feeder cattle to JBS and see how that works, or selling feeder cattle to Paul Engler and see how well that works. No, he doesn't know that. He doesn't know all those things that are really impacting some of these members, although he should be hearing it from bull customers.
So something I've been thinking about since I talked to Don, and I talked to Brett Kinsey from RCAF as well. I haven't reached out to anybody at U.S. Cattlemen's Association. Maybe I should, just for due diligence. But here's the question. So of those three organizations, NCBA, RCAF, and USCA, those are pretty much the three national cattlemen's organizations that everybody's heard of, right?
That's right.
So here's what I want to know. Where are their members geographically? And what's the average size of those operations? Like, maybe have it on a map to where there's like a blue dot for an RCAF and the size of the dot is the size of the operation. Like, I'd like to see that on a map, size of operation and where they're at and who they're a member of. And I kind of feel like that there's going to be a pattern, right? Like RCAF is going to be more up in the Dakotas and Montana and Idaho. USCA is kind of going to be in the Southwest. RCAF is going to be represented by the feed yards and the packers and the backyard cow people that are east of the Mississippi River.
RCAF?
No, RCAF would be kind of like Northern Plains.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. So who are you just talking about?
RCAF, Northern Plains, U.S. Cattlemen's kind of Southwest.
And then who did you say was east of the Mississippi?
NCBA is
yeah. Okay, I thought you said RCAF. Okay, yeah. NCBA is going to be serving the biggest meat packers. They're going to be serving the big contract feed yards. They're going to be serving the power in the industry, the concentrated power.
So I heard it from Brett and I heard it from Don. They both said the membership tells us what they want to support. I get that. Totally get that.
Right.
Let's be transparent about where your members are.
Well, and also who they are.
Yeah.
And how much power they have as a member. I used to be a member of National Cattlemen's Association. I was there that year in San Antonio in '96 when they merged the checkoff, which I opposed. But I went to those meetings. I went to I was at the 2001 NCBA meeting, so I hung with them for 5 years after the merger. But when I was in a marketing committee meeting, I'd be the only guy speaking out. And I'd be getting shouted down by an IBP employee. They were on the board now. And Bruce Bass would be sitting up in front of me in the aisle, gazing with his gaze going back to all those big cattle feeders, keeping their mouths shut. Bruce Bass was the head buyer for IDP. So I was a member, but it didn't help me to show up. The biggest and the strongest ran the organization, and that was the big meat packers. They ran the organization. It was just sickening to see the head buyers of all these slaughterhouses, at the bar drinking together and laughing and, calling Callicrate an idiot from the back row. And I mean, we were being shouted down. And the bottom line is Don Scheffelbein's membership that runs the organization is the big meat packers and their partner big feed yard people. So it's not the cow-calf guy. So the cow-calf people, they may be members of NCBA. I'd love to see a real membership list, because I'm saying they got a whole lot fewer members than they claim. But Don Scheffelbein's membership that he talks about that runs the organization of the big meat packers, it is not cow-calf people. For to get that representation, you do have to go to RCAF. And the United States Cattlemen's Association, once they got some checkoff money, they got awfully quiet on the market concentration problem. And they got awfully quiet on the protest around the checkoff and the misuse of those dollars. And so I don't see the U.S. Cattlemen's Association being near strong enough for the cowman. See, I think the only guy that really matters in this business right now is the cow-calf producer. If we don't have the calves being produced on these ranches, these farmer feeders aren't going to have anything to put in their feedlots. The big feeders aren't going to have anything except for what they import out of Mexico and Canada. They honestly don't know when to quit being predators in the market. They don't know when to quit. It's all about my self-interest and my short-term profitability right now. And all of that is being given power through the checkoff financing the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And we keep picking them off. So you give a little checkoff money to the U.S. cattlemen's and they become a little weaker. RCAF is the only organization that stands strong. Brett Kenzie is awesome. He does a terrific job as president of that organization. But he's got a front row seat in this industry. He raises cattle, he feeds cattle, and he has to sell them to a damn meat packer. And if you live that every day, you are fighting a war. You get up every day having to look at the market to see how you're supposed to feel. And that is no way to live your life. We've got to fix this thing. And I think the first step that we have to take is not the compromise bill. My God, hold the phone on all of this legislation that's being proposed now, right, in these ag committees. Just stop it. Don't talk about it. Grassley and Tester and Deb and Frazier or Fisher from Nebraska, just be quiet and stop it. Withdraw it all. And we got to do one thing, just one thing. We've got to reverse the confidentiality provision take it out of the price reporting, mandatory price reporting, get rid of the confidentiality provision. How does a market work with secret trades that are going on? I'm saying you get rid of that confidentiality rule and just let the shit fly. It will be a firestorm when these cattle feeders find out what Paul Engler's been getting for cattle for the last 30 years compared to what they were paying or getting paid. And they're all competing at the same sale barn for feeder cattle. If you knew the feedlots out there that were absolutely guaranteed a profit on every animal, regardless of what the price does, up or down, wouldn't you be mad when your little feedlot went broke and you played the fool's game all those years? You'd want to get even with somebody. I'm just saying. Make
Especially
every
if I was
single transaction totally transparent.
Yeah, I'd get real upset, especially if I was feeding, basically the same cattle, the same thing for the same amount of days, and they were yielding and grading and weighing the same as the guy down the road, but I'm getting 20% less.
Brian, I ran a commercial feedlot, the one I built in 1978 with my shareholder friends in St. Francis, Kansas. I ran that feedlot for 8 years. When I started, we had 20 buyers we could sell to. And then I left in about 1986 and things were not fun. I mean, I felt like a transfer agent. I mean, you get these wonderful ranch families out of the Sand Hills of Nebraska to bring you cattle to feed, retain ownership. You know, Cattle Facts is talking about knowing your genetics and, you know, knowing what your cattle can do. So you're part of that. You're having steer futurities where people are bringing in, you know, several head of their herd to test them and see what their genetics are doing. And you're all wrapped up in this total BS that the national cattlemen's and Cattle Facts and the big meat packers are promoting. And all the while they're buying out their competitors, they're predatory pricing their competitors, they're lying, they're cheating, they're stealing, they're violating the Packers and Stockyards Act. And all the while, as a cattle feeder, a custom cattle feeder, I'm out there flying my airplane around trying to get cattle in my feedlot. And in the end, I felt like a transfer agent. I'm transferring the equity of their ranch to the meat packing industry as a cattle feeder. And of course, my interest was to keep my pens full. You know, I've got to get the throughput. I've got to get the 25 cents a head a day yardage on those animals to where I can make my part work. And so, you know, I can't even see the reality for the financial demands. And then as time passes, it gets harder and harder and harder to the point where Jim Keller down at Oakley Feedlot, the Keller Brother Feed Yard, he just gives up. And he says, IBP, you can have my cattle. And you tell me at the end of the week what you're going to pay me. But I don't have time to negotiate price with a bunch of meat packers that have more power than I do. And it does me no good. He says, just, you can have them. And IBP might have said, hey, yeah, that's great. Mr. Keller, we'll give you 50 cents over the high of the week. And that was it. And then more and more feedlots got more and more tired, and they just started handing off their cattle to these packers and letting Callicrate up in St. Francis and Dan Jones up in Scott City let us little guys with no power, we're going to set the cash market for everybody. And so the industry dies. And when I say we got to have transparency, we've got to get rid of the confidentiality rule. I want people to just see what the big feedlots are being paid to sell this industry out, to eliminate competition and turn everybody into a chicken farmer, except worse. You can't pay the mortgage on a ranch with 2 jobs in town like you can a chicken house when you're under contract with Tyson.
Yeah. Yep. So more small plants. More small plants are the answer. I mean, I did have written down here to ask you about 5014 and Fisher Grassley and the contract library and the compromise bill, but I think you kind of, that ship has sailed, so to speak.
Yeah, it has. But Brian, more small plants are not the answer without a market. And right now, nobody's talking about the market. Look at the Herzog plant in Missouri. Good guys, Jim and Todd Herzog.
Okay.
What a terrific opportunity. I mean, they saw COVID hit and they broke ground and they built a plant. And then Hy-Vee, they got into Hy-Vee. Well, Hy-Vee had a bunch of empty shelves, and probably those local store managers saw a real opportunity in finding a local supplier that wasn't going to, let them run out. And so they got into some Hy-Vees in Kansas City. Well, then things lightened up a little bit, and the big packers were starting to flow a little more product into the big stores, and they probably discovered that there was this little packer by the name of Herzog Meats out of Missouri that was in those darn Hy-Vee stores. Well, we can't have that. You can't have those guys buying outside of the system. I mean, here I am, Cargill. I own the meat counter. Tyson owns the meat counter at the Walmart. Poultry, pork, chicken, the fake meat, the whole thing. We own it all. You can't be having a Herzog come in and put up his little display. I mean, my goodness, his product looks so much better than ours. And that's so embarrassing, and so pretty soon, Herzog gets the phone call. Hy-Vee kicks them out. So now what are they going to do? Well, they can custom kill, but my gosh, how are you going to pay, your labor? How are you going to cover your overhead with your custom kill? and there's just not enough volume there at good enough margins to be able to make it work. And that's why the small plants went out of business to begin with. That's why there aren't any, is because they couldn't make a living, doing custom killing. And of course, if they brought in USDA, they had a whole nother level of expense that went on to the operation that I would estimate adds about a 30% increase in your costs, because everything slows down. You've got lots of paperwork to do. You got to hire extra staff to do that paperwork. And for a small plant operator that actually had a knife in his hand and was on the kill crew and was on the cut crew to process those carcasses into retail cuts, that represented a whole lot more expense for him and a whole lot more headache. And the last thing a guy with a knife in his hand wants to do is get on his laptop and fill out forms for USDA that don't make food safer. And so USDA is right now, in my opinion, is not serious about building more small plants or promoting small plants. The grants they're throwing out there are these massive, huge grants that can really only be for plants that are going to be owned at some point by the big meat packers. It might be a North Platte feeder, a North Platte plant, or it might be a Junction City plant, or whatever it may be out there. But without a market, without being able to sell to the consumer, none of those plants are going to succeed. And the big packers then just get a more modern version of what they already have.
Okay. Let's talk about like meat plant nuts and bolts for a little bit. So how many times have you upgraded or expanded your plants?
Well, I started out with a mobile slaughter unit, and we built a prototype in conjunction with the Socially Responsible Egg Project, SRAP. They funded the first mobile slaughter unit that I had in our cattle operation. And, we didn't like it. It wasn't designed right, which is always true with prototyping, right? You always find better ways and make improvements. And that's
why it's prototyping.
And that's part of the fun too. And so in this story of that mobile slaughter units gets more interesting when you learn that they were IBP's trailers. It was their tram trailers that they put the little packer out of business with. So what happened when IBP introduced box beef, that meant they didn't want to sell carcasses anymore. And so they convinced the big retailers to buy their carcasses, and the small plants all across the country that sold carcasses, like I used to see in the meat plant when I was in high school, they didn't have a market anymore. And so IBP came to them and said, well, hey, look, we've got excess boxing capacity. We'll buy your carcasses. And so IBP is going to buy the carcasses of the small plants that they compete for fat cattle with. Really? And packers and stockyards didn't see a problem with that. And nobody seemed to see a problem with that. Well, they use these tram trailers to haul these whole half carcasses, not quarters, half carcasses. So they needed a special tram door. They had to build a new dock to back the trailer up to, and they had to use, and then IBP would haul these carcasses. And so the small packer wasn't selling quarters anymore. He was simply really killing cattle for IBP and getting squeezed in competing with them for the live cattle. And I've got the set of notes from the IBP meeting where they plan this whole strategy. And they said, we've got to move fast because we got to break them in a hurry, and we got to shut them down. And that's what they did with these tram trailers. So here we've got these 55-foot long tram trailers that are extra tall and extra low to the ground and specifically made to haul half carcasses in. And that's where you used to hear about that swinging beef being so dangerous to pull down the road with a semi. And because they literally did swing in those trailers, and they were real top heavy. So what we did is we bought 6 of those trailers and converted them into mobile slaughter units. And so the first and second trailer that we did were in St. Francis, Kansas. The first trailer went back to the East Coast to kill hogs. And so I got the second trailer, which was really cool. We did everything on that trailer that we needed to do to fix it. and make it better. We could kill an animal every 20 minutes. The cooler on it would hold about 15 head. And so you could fill the cooler every day. And then one of the more innovative, getting back to Don Schuffelbein, innovation, right? We added a 6-foot quartering section on the back of that trailer so that we could quarter outside of the cooler. Well, that gave us more room to hold 2 or 3 more head inside the cooler, and then back a truck up, a semi truck that hauled quarters, not halves, quarters, and then we could quarter those carcasses and hang them on in a rail trailer, or put them in tubs and haul them in a straight truck or whatever you wanted to do that was refrigerated. And so we're very innovative. I mean, we think of cool stuff all the time. And so that mobile slaughter unit was just really, we nailed it with that one. And then we a few more got built out, and one of them is Wild Idea Buffalo up in Rapid City, Nebraska, Rapid City, South Dakota. They kill buffalo, and they go right out onto the ranch, like the picture behind you. If those were buffalo, they'd be right out there, and they'd shoot them where they stand, bleed them, put them in the cooler, and then haul them back into town at the end of the day, or at the end of the whatever days it took to fill the cooler. But the mobile slaughter unit is definitely not the answer. You can't afford to move them around. You've got to dock them, put them in one spot with a really good corral system, so you're not having a rodeo. You want a good kill box. You want to be able to have a place to get rid of your slaughter waste, which makes the feedlot make a lot of sense, because you can bury it in the manure pile and compost it. You've got to have a way of getting water to it and water away from it. And if you're in a feedlot like I am, they consider the water coming out of the slaughter unit as agricultural waste. And so we're able to utilize the existing runoff system in our feedlot and catchments that we have there to catch that water. And so we sold that mobile slaughter unit. It had been housed inside a new building that my son put up, Tegan built. And it was really it was serving its purpose, and it was doing everything we wanted it to do. But COVID hit, and we decided we really need to be able to kick up, our slaughter. And we just decided to, we built the building, specifically designed it so that we could put in a slaughter floor at some point. Well, now we've had 5, 6, 7 years of experience slaughtering animals through a mobile slaughter unit. We pretty much knew what a new kind of a design would look like on a kill floor. And the building was designed with overhead doors and so forth to accommodate that. And we sold the mobile slaughter unit to Northern Montana College under the Montana State University system.
Yeah, you're delivering that last time we talked.
Yeah, and it's going to be part of that meat cutting, butchering curriculum up there. It's going to be really cool what they do with that. But that is a really great unit. It'll do 15 cattle a day every day, and 4 guys basically can run that operation very, very efficiently. And so we sold the unit. We built a purpose built kill floor there in St. Francis that is unlike any kill floor that's out there. You talk about efficient and just seriously low cost. We use a skinning cradle, and we lift the animal to the up with a hoist, and that hoist is on a trolley on an I-beam system, where it's moved along, where it's gutted, it's split, and then it's put on the rail, where we do the final inspection, and we do an acid spray for final pathogen control before those carcasses go into a 70 head cooler, 30 on the kill side, on the drip side, and 40 head on the finished cooler side. And we're now pouring concrete here very soon for a new freezer and building a cut room inside that building. So and we'll be able to move carcasses directly out of the coolers into the cut room, so that we can help Colorado Springs keep up with carcass processing. And so the animals we cut or kill for custom business in St. Francis can just stay there. And our kill crew will probably only work a couple, 3 days a week, and then cut on the other days. But now we've got the capacity to do 30 cattle a day. And that is such an ideal number, because you can service a plant like that with a 3,500 head feedlot. You can keep all the slaughter waste on site. You can make it into beautiful fertilizer that builds soil health. You can get rid of the water in good shape. You can use 30 to 50 gallons of water per head per day, as opposed to the big meat packers that are using over 700 gallons of water a day. You can really level things out to where your kill crew becomes very skilled and gets back to what a journeyman butcher was expected to do in 1980, which was hang 10 head of cattle in a cooler a day per man. And you know, we're looking at 4 or 5 right now with our crew not being all that highly skilled, but that can improve with better training and all that. So we're really looking forward to the support of these curriculums, getting kids trained up to where they can come in and run plants like this. And so, IBP, we're looking at 4 or 5 head a day per man. The journeyman butcher in 1980 was expected to hang 10 head a day by himself. And GNC Packing Company, in fact, where we first started killing cattle 22 years ago, did in fact kill 40 head a day with 4 butchers. And they did that consistently every week. Tyson IBP are getting about 1.57 animals per man per day. So they're getting less than 20% of what a skilled butcher got in 1980.
And like, I
and
guess
claiming efficiencies.
Yeah, I guess in 1980 they did have power saws and band saws and
I had all that. Yeah.
I guess
But they were,
really hasn't.
Brian, they were producing a carcass, not
Right.
box beef. And so they jump right in with that argument. I say, you know what, we're killing we're twice as efficient as you are with our labor. When I talk about killing 4 to 5 animals per man per day, and they're getting 1.57 at Garden City and Dakota City combined. And they say, yeah, but we put it in a box. And my answer to that is why? Why aren't you shipping carcasses to butchers and grocery stores that know what they're doing and can put it in a fresh counter? Why instead of zombies that just take it out of a box and put it in a counter? Why don't we bring back the meat cutting skill and put it in retail stores again? Well, the reason is when IBP in about 1969 decided that the mafia out of New York City needed to pay their bill for the meat they'd been buying, loaded up and went to New York, and Courier Holman and his fellow executive met with Mo Steinman, who was head of the meat division of the New York Mafia. And basically they bribed the store executives, the grocery store executives, to take box beef. And they had to bribe the union as well. The union had to agree that they were going to replace carcass beef with box beef. And that was going to result in about a 40% cut in wages. Well, that interested the grocery store folks a bunch. They thought that was a great idea. Well, the union probably didn't like it a whole lot, but they were getting their pocket padded. And the bottom line is Courier Holman left New York with all the money that was owed him. And in fact, he'd been threatened by the bank that they were going to have to shut IBP down if he couldn't collect that receivable from New York. And so basically he struck a deal, 50 cents a hundredweight on all box beef that went into that region. And at the time, it was about 25% of all the beef consumed in the United States in that area. And so he came home and very proudly, announced that, that they had the business and that they'd be shipping a whole lot of stuff into the New York area. And then the law enforcement got involved, and of course, it's still going on today, but the law enforcement got involved, and there were charges filed because of the bribery and the dealing with the mafia. And basically the whole deal was the judge in the case did convict Courier Holman of a felony count for that bribing and working with the mafia, but said, you know what, he really didn't have a choice. the competitors, the other competitors were, in order to compete, in order to get, his meat into New York, he really had no choice but to deal with the mafia. And so, Courier, you're not going to get a jail sentence, and you're only going to have to pay $7,000 in fines. That's what the judge did. That sounds a whole lot like the judge in the IVP Tyson case that said,
Yes.
hey, rule of reason, they got to do what they got to do. We're not going to enforce the law. We're going to let them get away with it. And that's what they did. And that is precisely how IVP got to where they are in the market today. And eventually then became a part of Tyson. So, this is all based upon a whole lot of illegal acts that law enforcement has completely and totally failed to enforce the laws. And there ought to be people in jail. And one, I really liked what the the assistant attorney general said at one of the hearings the other day. Is he said, I'm not going to be a member of the Chicken Shit Club. And the book was written called The Chicken Shit Club, and basically it's the Justice Department and law enforcement being willing to settle cases instead of prosecute them and actually get a felony count and maybe get some people put in jail. They're too willing to settle the cases, like they did with JBS in the $52.5 million. So they really haven't changed their mode of enforcement. It's pretty much still the same, and they still are the Chicken Shit Club. But the reason it's called the Chicken Shit Club is James Comey was presenting to a group of state's attorneys general, and he would ask them questions, and they'd raise their hand, and he says, how many of you have never lost a case against a big corporation? And there'd be a bunch of hands go up. Oh man, that's really awesome. Or how many of you lost maybe just a few cases? And so, there'd be some hands go up. They lost a few cases. And he says, well, I just want you to know that you're all members. All of you guys who raised your hand are members of the Chicken Shit Club, because you didn't actually try those cases. You settled those cases. That didn't fix a damn thing. You've got to prosecute them. You've got to break that market power, that abusive market power. And of course, I don't know how much Comey did in that regard either. But the whole attitude since Reagan, especially, was president, is this dereg mentality. Just we don't need regulations. But the runs we do get are anti-small business, anti-small meat packer, anti-rancher, anti-cattle feeder.
Well, of course, because the people that write those laws, they got to protect the people that are donating to their campaigns, and
that's right.
Screw the rest of us.
That's right.
So last week I went down to Fort Worth, the Grass-Fed Exchange, met a lot of really awesome fans. It was really cool. Everybody that came up and said hi. But the thing I want to talk to you about, Mike, is on the second day, I sat through a couple breakout sessions about processing at scale and getting value back out of carcasses. And one of the speakers that I listened to, he has a meat plant that he's expanded from a fairly small operation, say 10 people. Now he's got 150. And, and I think they just do beef, but they also have, cooked products and sausage products and, hot dogs and things like that. They do cuts, they do boxes. And I think they'll even ship primals out of there. Anyway, this gentleman was talking about capacity and scheduling, and that is one of his biggest problems, is making sure that he's got enough coming in the door to keep his cutters busy, because if he can't keep his cutters busy, then that snafus everything else down the line. Okay, and I say that because we talk on this podcast a lot about grass finishing and being regenerative. And the first one we did, you said that you've only been able to finish like 1 out of 3 years in St. Francis. And to be honest, it doesn't look good for this year again.
It's like 1 out of 10.
12. I hate to say it. It doesn't look good to do a whole lot of grass finishing anywhere in Kansas this year. But that is the problem, right? That's part of the problem with trying to be a grass-fed producer is knowing when that animal is going to be ready and having enough consistently that are going to be ready, spaced through the year that you can keep your processor happy. So, and I know you get around that by having a feedlot where you can control when those are finishing to some degree, and you know when they're going to be finished, and you also don't have to call around and look for a slot. So, what what do you have to say about the seasonality of grass finishing and plant capacity?
Well, Brian, I love the idea of grass finished product. I mean, you get to bypass the feedlot, which is really good. If you can actually finish an animal on grass, that's beautiful. But when you look at it from the perspective of what the risks are, like it doesn't rain, or or they just didn't finish this year for some reason, or we have grasses that aren't conducive to finishing the animal. They grow them okay, but they don't finish them very well. That you've got some things that are in the way of making that program successful. And so as a cattle feeder, and a small plant operator, I can schedule my cattle as long as I can feed them. I know they're going to be ready. And from a perspective of a retail store owner as well, I've got to know that I've got a consistent flow of product to my retail customers. And I've got wholesale customers as well. And so I can't depend on hoping it rains. Because like I said, in the last 2 out of the last 12 years, you could have probably finished cattle on grass, but they wouldn't have been big enough for me to suit my program. And I probably would have liked to have put another couple 100 pounds on them, even though they were in great shape coming off of grass. And that really impacts the bottom line of profitability too, is if you can take those animals to their genetic potential of their genetically, the right finish weight for the genetics of that animal, I think is important. Otherwise, we're wasting the animal's ability to produce food. But the way that I saw the grass-fed thing cranking up to begin with is Dale Lassiter at Matheson, Colorado, Lassiter grassland beef. And it was one fall, Dale preg checked his heifers, and he had some open heifers, and decided, well, let's sell some meat. Those heifers are beautiful, they're fat, they aren't pregnant, they put good weight on this summer, we had a great good season. And so you kill those heifers and you hang those up in the cooler next to something that's coming out of a feedlot, and honestly, you can't tell the difference, because of that plane of nutrition was sufficiently high that those open heifers really did a good job. And they're at their target weight, so they're weighing like 1150, maybe 1200 pounds, and it's just totally the ideal grass-fed product. So it's got a lot of quality, it's got marbling in the meat, and so you go out there and you present that to your retail customer, and they like it and they want more of it. Well, what if you got more demand than you have open heifers? Well, now we're going to keep the steers over. Well, then we hit a drought, or whatever, and we're ended up, we're killing feeder cattle at the end of the season instead of good, high quality, fat grass-fed beef. And so with a feedlot, at least you can manage that and minimize that risk. Like right now, I've got 300 cows that we run on our place. I would have had to sold them had I not had a feedlot. I mean, we did the corn stalks. We went out and grazed at crop aftermath. We worked hard putting up electric fence all over the place to keep those cows in some feed. But in the end, we had to bring them into the feedlot and feed them a cow ration, some cheap, just some cheap hay and whatever else we could put together to try to keep those costs down. But at least we kept the cow herd. And these are special cows. These are Angus cows bred to Wagyu bulls that are producing, some of the most beautiful meat you'll ever see in the world out of our operation. And so I see the feedlot is really making an operation even more regenerative. You have a home. You have that, what we would call in the grazing business, that sacrifice pasture.
Yeah.
where you put the animals and they totally destroy it because there's too many in there for too long. Well, that's what a feedlot is for me, is I can bring those animals in, and it's sort of your sacrifice area. And now I can really let my grass come back and not put those animals out on that grass too soon. I'm just able to manage so much better. And from the feedlot perspective, I've got a really great water system there that I can now pipe all my pastures to where, I can run 600 head of cattle in one group, move them around and not overtax my water system. And so now I've got the pounds per acre that I need to really get the impact I want. But the feedlot is always there as that safety valve. And now with the feedlot, I can slaughter those animals on site. So now I've got a comfortable place for those animals to be. None of them have ever been on a truck in their entire life. They've never left the place. And I can slaughter them on site, low stress, making meat quality even better, and animal welfare, 100% better than what the others that go to a Tyson plant might experience. And so now I can get in the meat business instead of the cattle business and avoid the meat packer monopoly. And so that's really what it's done for me. And so when I see, and I see the absolute most efficient, best cattle feeding operation being the farmer feeder. That's a Brett Kinsey. That's an Eric Nelson in Iowa. These guys have the right size feedlots to support the crops that they grow. And so we run our cows on grass, all those marginal acres that can do nothing but feed a cow. And we run those cows on the grass. We bring them into these farmer feeders lots where all of that corn and hay and everything that was produced on that farm is fed to the livestock. So now they've maximized the value of their crop, and that's what Scheffelbein's doing too. Remember his conversation, and so you're putting your farm through the livestock, and then the really big advantage is that manure then goes back on the land that the crops came off of. We even put it on our pastures. And by the time that manure gets out back on those pastures, it's got biochar added to it. It's got all the slaughter waste that's been added to it. It's a powerful compost product, but that's made possible with the feedlot. And so I manage a lot of the risk in the industry, or my business is managed with the feedlot. And so now I've got a carcass going to a meat shop. But but go back to Scheffelbein. I just described his operation. He's producing cattle, he's feeding the byproducts, and he's selling that product to a meat packer. But if you're doing all of that and you've been all really innovative and you're efficient and all that stuff, and you got a lot of family labor in the deal, aren't you the lowest cost producer? Way lower than the big feedlot that's hiring all their help and feeding $8 corn. You're way more efficient. That's by far the most ideal operation. But if you're selling into a monopolized market, and now instead of getting paid for the corn that you grew that went through the cattle, you're giving it away with losses on the cattle. Your kids that work on the operation, they're not getting paid. The family's not getting paid. You're going to the bank, you need to borrow money to pay the interest. This is the business we've been in the last 30 some years. In my vision of the future, where we can connect producers more closely to consumers, fixes that problem. We have to fix that problem. How many of these kids want to come back? None of them. None of them. You can't make a living.
And none of them will until we fix it.
That's right.
So kind of about the last thing on my list is, and this really probably shouldn't even be on my list because I know you've talked about it before, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to address working with the Humane Society of the United States, because this was a couple weeks ago. I can't remember what it was. There was somebody that was really, really hot on Facebook about, well, what does Mike think about this? What does Mike think about this? Well, what does he say about working with the Humane Society of the United States? And honestly, I just linked him the last podcast episode that we did because I'm not your spokesman, right?
Right. Sure. Yeah, good.
But I'll at least give you a platform again to address the haters that are upset that you might have agreed with some things that the HSUS has said.
Yeah, and you know, one of the real effective tools of the monopoly, the food monopoly, is to divide people, get them to fighting over stuff that doesn't matter, and that way we can continue to pick their pockets and exploit them. And so that's just a basic tool that they use very, very effectively. But I'll never forget that year I went to RCAF. And I can't remember how long ago it was. It was probably 10 or more years ago by now. And RCAF is this little group of cow-calf producers. You know, some farmer feeders involved, and guys like myself that feed cattle are involved. But they're really focused on market concentration issues. The big deal for RCAF is, how do we get a fair price for what we produce? How do we restore competition? And it really comes down to a political problem. You know, we've talked about how Congress is owned by big corporations, and the only thing that beats that relationship is a vote. That's the only thing that beats a lobbyist, is the voters kicking the guy out, or at least having that serious threat of kicking the guy out. And so I always encouraged the RCAF leadership to look to the consumer to partner with. Try to get the consumer on your side. Let them know that their food best comes from an independent family farm and ranch and a farmer feeder operation, as opposed to the big corporate model. And they did that. I mean, they got with the consumers union, and I think, you know, we're starting to really do some good partnerships with some of the consumer groups. I think Food and Water Watch, Patty Lavera was good friends at the time and presented on RCAF's conventions and on some of their panels. And I said, but look, guys, there is an organization out there that likes animals. How many in this room, how many ranchers in this room don't like animals? You know, you've got some things potentially in common with the Humane Society of the United States. What's his name? The Mr. Evil guy from 60 Minutes, the big backer of Farm Bureau, Rick Berman.
Okay.
You know, he's got Humane Watch, the whole website that makes the Humane Society bad. But, you know, that's another wedge kind of sort of a project to divide people. But I said, think about this. The best steward, the best husbandman is a rancher, a family farmer, a farmer raising pigs out in the pasture in a hut. I mean, the pigs are happy, the farmer's happy, the kids are in 4-H, everybody's making a little money. It's working good, and that's the right way to raise a hog. And I said, and how many of you can agree that it's a good idea to put a sow in a 2x7 crate and they never get to turn around? How many of you think that's a great way to raise pigs? And how many of you think it's a great way to raise chickens, to put them in a battery cage with other hens and they can't even spread their wings? How many of you think that's a good idea?
Well, animal science research said that was the safest, most humane way to do it, Mike.
Yeah, exactly. But a rancher knows better. I mean, they're not going to do that to their cattle. You know, it's better husbandry. They're the stewards of the land. Well, it so happens that the Humane Society had decided at that time that they might be better off supporting family farmers and ranchers, as opposed to just, you know, fighting agriculture and many of the practices that we consider inhumane, like the sow in a gestation crate and the chicken in a battery cage, and 150,000 head of cattle in one spot. And when the snowstorm comes, by the third day, they still aren't fed, or they're in mud up to their butt and they're losing, you know, a whole lot of cattle. As opposed to Eric Nelson and Brett Kinsey's yards, they were fed the next day after the blizzard.
Right.
And all the kids were out there scooping bunks. And I mean, you talk about humane care and quality care to animals, that's where you're going to get it. And so basically the Humane Society came to myself and Joe Maxwell and some of us producers, and they said, don't we have something in common here? There's 11 million of us and we vote. Don't we have something in common here? Could we work together to support family farm agriculture and really do a better, more effective job of fighting the factory farm side that's so exploitive of ranchers and producers and workers and all that. And we said, yeah, why don't we just give it a shot? And so I suggested that year at RCAF that the Humane Society and their 11 million members might be a pretty good collaboration. And of course, it didn't go anywhere, but it got said. And then we just went right on, and we developed some state groups, some advisory groups that would advise the Humane Society on policy. And so I did a chart one time, and it basically it was the organization like RCAF, NCBA, the the Humane Society, and just where they stood on certain policy. And it was interesting because on country of origin labeling, mandatory price reporting, market concentration, really these seriously important policies, Humane Society was 100% in alignment with RCAF. And NCBA was on the other side with the meat packers. And so, we were really making the case that this would be a pretty good group, to perhaps align with and get them, when they hit the hill in DC, DC feels it. I mean, when their lobbyists and their, animal lovers hit the hill, I guarantee you there's passion there. There's a lot of volume to their voice, and the hill listens. And so we really did do some good there for a little bit. And then we got crossways. What happened was the Humane Society had partnered with Whole Foods on GAP certification, the Global Animal Partnership thing. And it was deceptive, it was misleading, and we felt as advisors to the Humane Society through this advisory group that they shouldn't be a part of that, what we thought was food fraud. And we were never able to break the connection between the Humane Society and Whole Foods Global Animal Partnership, which was a certification program that Whole Foods imposed upon their suppliers that wasn't being held up to the stated standards. It was more of a marketing thing for Whole Foods to be able to sell to their consumers. And honestly, they were just producing, regular feedlot, factory farm product and putting, what I thought was a fake label on it. And many of the other folks in the group thought was a fake label as well. And so we ended up parting ways. I'm no longer on an advisory panel with HSUS. I don't see them as a threat to the kind of agriculture that I want, but I see them not being willing to address what I thought was a fatal flaw in their relationship on the GAP certification thing. And it was just, to me, it was a question of, they had to decide if they thought their relationship with Whole Foods was more important than their relationship with their family farm and ranch advisory group. We ended up just parting ways. But still, Brian, I think we did a lot of good during those years of really earning some trust of a lot of the membership of HSUS. I mean, like Kevin Fulton would go and present to their annual meeting. And I mean, he's a, Kevin, I mean, he's an awesome operator out of Nebraska, regenerative for sure, like multi-species livestock producer. And he literally would get a standing applause at an HSUS board meeting. There'd be 600-700 people in the room. And I was there and I witnessed it. I mean, they loved Kevin Fulton. Sure, there's a lot of vegetarians in the room. But you got to ask yourself, why are they a vegetarian? And for the HSUS member or supporter, it's going to be the way animals are treated.
And I think that's a very important point. You said it, where they're not against the kind of agriculture that we want to do, right?
That's right.
But they don't like seeing those 50 and 70,000 head feedlots with, a 20-acre shit pond. They don't like seeing the 250,000 head chicken barn or the 10,000 head hog barn, which I think just about everybody that listens to this podcast is going to agree that shit's gross.
That's right. Especially pig, especially hogs, they're really bad. And I mean, when you stack them up and confine them the way that Iowa has done, it makes the place unlivable. And no family farmer wants to not be able to cook a steak out on his back deck in the evenings. Except, he can't stand the hog smell of all the barns that are on his property line. So, we've got to fix this. And I think we have to be willing to work with others, and don't let Rick Berman, drive the wedge and try to divide us to make us weaker. The fact is, the way we win is we win by coming together, and we win with a vote. And to me, we've got to, I loved what one of the old talking heads in Washington said the other day. He said, we just really need the old people to leave. And he's talking about the Nancy Pelosi's, the Joe Biden, the guy in the Senate,
Mitch
with
McConnell.
Mitch McConnell. These guys really, honestly, and truly need to retire. They're part of the problem. They're part of the Wall Street Congress partnership instead of the people Congress partnership. And honestly, they do need to go. I mean, get some young people in there that have more energy and have a better perspective of where the future ought to lie for Americans, and get rid of all this corruption that just won't ever end. We just keep covering more and more of it up every day.
Maybe term limits too.
Yeah, I know there's some benefit in some wisdom among some leadership, but man, these guys are hanging around way too long. I mean, poor old Mitch McConnell really needs to go spend some time with his grandkids.
They'll be in college before he retires.
They'll be great grandkids.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just one more point on that HSUS thing. When I was in the lawsuit against IBP, and we were in Alabama, working on the case, and I met an attorney, Buck Watson was his name, and Buck Watson, it was a really successful plaintiff's lawyer from Alabama, and was very political. And they were down there talking about blue dogs and blue dog Democrats and all this stuff, and a blue dog Democrat was, I'd rather vote for a blue dog than a Democrat or whatever. I forget all that stuff, but they had all these categories that they would put you in. You're either a conservative Democrat or a liberal Democrat, or you're a Republican, this or that. And so Buck Watson said to me one day, he said, Mike, we were talking about politics. He says, Mike, politics is about addition, not subtraction. And that was my message to RCAF. Who can you collaborate with? Who can you coordinate your effort with to where you can get power again? And let's try to do something before we have a complete meltdown of the current system, which is coming and which has already happened, and we haven't done anything about it yet. Let's really try to fix this mess right now, as soon as we possibly can. I want my grandkids to come back to that farming and cattle operation in St. Francis. My kids didn't want to come back because they saw how awful the 80s were. It was, and how,
the 80s were bad though. I mean, the 80s were
really
bad.
And they didn't want to come back because of what grandma and granddad were telling them at every meal. Don't do what we did. Well, that just drove me to want to make it better. How do we carve out, like Brett Kinsey called it, he says, you need a lifeboat. And for me, Ranch Foods Direct has been my lifeboat. It's cost money, but at least it's a lifeboat, and it keeps me running, hopefully to get to a better place on land at some point, where a lot of us can be doing what I'm doing. And a lot of us can be connecting back to those consumers more directly. And that's why I'm really excited about this project that I told you about at the very first of the podcast, is if we can build these little local regional food villages and take care of the producer, the small business guy that's the miller of the grains from the region. And think about a miller being in a little village like that. He's got the baker, the distiller, the brewer. He's got the pie maker. He's got, how much darn demand has he got for flour in that place?
A bunch.
He's got a lot. And of course, it's going to be stone ground. It's not going to be like what Cargill and ADM produce. It's going to be a healthy, better flour. It's not going to have GMOs involved. It's not going to have Roundup involved. It's just going to be amazing.
He's going to go buy the heirloom grain from the guy down the road that only planted 40 acres as a test, and it's going to be some weird ancient variety that nobody's grown for 150 years, and it's going to be a funny color. It'll be so damn delicious, everybody will want it.
And he's going to pay too much, I hope.
Yes.
And the consumer is still going to get a great deal on that loaf of bread. Have you ever picked up a loaf of real sourdough in one hand and a loaf of Wonder Bread in the other?
I don't know if I've directly done that comparison, but I have had sourdough made from turkey red.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We're talking about sourdough boulangerie in Colorado Springs. He's going to be in the village. He's going to be the baker. And I got to just tell you that, I mean, the loaf of sourdough that Sean makes with sourdough boulangerie is so much heavier. I mean, it's real food.
Yeah.
And you know what? You don't have a gluten intolerance to it because it's sourdough. He fermented the grain. Those grains have a built-in protective device. It's, you know, they don't want you eating them. And so with sourdough and the fermentation process, you can pretty much eliminate that problem. So anyway, that's what I want to surround myself with, is good food and people who make good food and grow good commodities.
And I think that's something that we can all try to surround ourselves with, is a community that is centered around providing food for each other.
Well, we've got the why we need to do it in front of us, and from baby formula to everything else that goes in our diet. So I think it's time. I think it's time to come together and build some true local regional infrastructure that serves people instead of corporations.
Yes, for sure. I'm really excited to follow along and see how you build your food village, Mike.
We'll keep you informed.
Yep. All right. Where do you want anywhere you want to send people today?
Well, you can always go to MikeCallicrate.com and you know, you can check out the blog. I got a listserv and just almost everything else I do there is somehow represented, from, you know, from Ranch Foods Direct to the Callicrate Cattle Company, what we do for a regenerative program. You know, when you can make money, you can really be regenerative.
Yeah, for sure. So I missed you at Grass Fed Exchange. I think the next one coming up on the calendar, that's more than a couple weeks out. Let's see, RCAF convention, August in Deadwood, South Dakota.
Yes.
Are you going to go?
Yeah, I'll be there.
I think I might have to do that. Plane tickets out of Dodge City are half of what they are out of Wichita. If you can
really,
yeah.
Would that be a problem? Maybe with some concentration, consolidation issues, monopoly power. I
think it's federally subsidized tickets out of Dodge City, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Like Colorado Springs is starting to get more flights, which is really good. But United has way too much power at DIA. You know, they control gates, and it makes it hard.
More monopoly power. What else? Quivera's Regenerate, probably back in Albuquerque this year. You going to that one?
Yeah, I usually try to get there.
Okay.
COVID slowed me down a little bit from going, but
well, 2 opportunities to see you this year. I'm gonna really look into making an RCAF up in Deadwood. I think that'll be a really good time. It's gonna kind of depend on when my summer help has to go back to college, because I think it's either that week, or the week before, or the week after. So if he's going back to college, that means I've got to go back to work.
Oh, well, good luck. I hope that works out, because RCAF's a really good meeting.
We'll see if we can make it work. And I think with that, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Mike, it's always been always awesome. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Yep. All right, gang. Have a great week.